When Albert Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge, he wasn't dismissing knowledge, he was revealing a deeper truth. Knowledge can take you as far as the textbooks, the classrooms, and the rules of the world will allow, but imagination has no limits. It's what takes an idea and turns it into innovation. It's what transforms a dream into reality. And it's what separates leaders from followers. You see, knowledge is about what already exists, but imagination is about creating what doesn't exist yet. Every breakthrough, every invention, every movement that has ever changed history was born in the mind of someone who dared to see beyond what they knew. And if you're going to build the life you've been called to live, if you're going to rise above average and step into greatness, then you have to understand this: your imagination will always take you further than your knowledge ever could. Think about the nature of knowledge for a moment. Knowledge is, by definition, confined. It's a record of what has already been discovered, tested, and verified. Knowledge is important. Of course, it helps us navigate reality with structure and predictability, but it's always tethered to the past. It's yesterday's discoveries, yesterday's systems, yesterday's frameworks written down, memorized and stored. And because of that, knowledge has boundaries. It can tell you what something is, but rarely does it tell you what something could become. Imagination, however, is different. Imagination is the human mind's ability to transcend what is known. It allows us to look at the same facts everyone else sees and envision an entirely different outcome. Where knowledge closes the book, imagination begins a new chapter. Where knowledge gives you the map, imagination gives you the courage to redraw the map, to extend it beyond the edges marked unknown. That's why every single advancement in human history was first an act of imagination. Before the wheel was a tool, it was an idea. Before the airplane soared, it existed in the imagination of people who refused to accept gravity as an unbreakable chain. Even something as simple as electricity lighting up our homes was once considered impossible until someone dared to imagine otherwise. The real danger in worshiping knowledge alone is that it tempts us into complacency. When you believe knowledge is the pinnacle, you stop searching, you stop questioning, you stop reaching. You become content with what has been handed down. But imagination doesn't let you settle. It constantly pushes you to ask, what if, why not, how far can I go? That questioning is uncomfortable, even dangerous at times, but it is the only way progress is made. This is why imagination is tied so deeply to human freedom. Knowledge without imagination is like living inside a cage. You can memorize every corner of the cage, every line of the bars, every shadow it casts, but you'll never leave it. Imagination is what allows you to picture yourself outside the cage, walking free, and eventually to discover the tools to break out. It's not an exaggeration to say that the quality of your life is directly related to the quality of your imagination. If you can't picture anything greater than what you already have, you've already accepted defeat. And let's be honest, many people stop imagining the moment they grow up. As children, we are filled with imagination. We can turn sticks into swords, cardboard into castles, and empty space into galaxies. But somewhere along the way, society trains that out of us. We're told to be realistic, to follow the rules, to stick to what we know. And slowly, the muscle of imagination atrophies. We end up mistaking knowledge for wisdom, as if memorizing more facts automatically leads to a greater life. But wisdom isn't just about what you know. It's about what you can conceive, what you can create, and what you're willing to pursue. So if knowledge is the foundation, imagination is the architecture. Knowledge provides the bricks, but imagination designs the cathedral. Without imagination, we would be living in a world permanently frozen in time, repeating the same actions, locked into the same outcomes. With imagination, we keep breaking barriers, reshaping possibilities, and redefining what it means to be human. That's why I tell you, don't just chase knowledge, cultivate imagination. Let knowledge inform you, but let imagination transform you. Because knowledge can only take you as far as the textbooks, the classrooms, and the experts of today. Imagination can take you beyond the horizon, into futures no one has written yet. And at the end of the day, the world isn't changed by those who only knew the facts. It's changed by those who dared to imagine something greater. If knowledge is the structure that helps us navigate the present, imagination is the energy that pulls us in the future. And this is why imagination is so deeply connected to vision and purpose. Knowledge can show you how to climb the ladder, but imagination determines which wall that ladder is leaning against. You can master every technique, memorize every rule, follow every path that has been laid before you, but if you lack imagination, you might be climbing toward a destination that doesn't matter to you at all. Vision is not something you stumble upon in a textbook. It is not handed to you by professors or employers. Vision comes from within. It comes from your ability to imagine a life, a future, a reality that does not yet exist. That's the essence of purpose. It is an imagined future that compels you to act in the present. Without imagination, purpose shrinks into mere survival. You wake up, you go to work, you repeat the cycle. But with imagination, survival transforms into pursuit. You're no longer asking, how do I get through today? You're asking, what can I build with today so that tomorrow looks different? This is why people who are truly great at what they do aren't driven primarily by knowledge. They're driven by vision. Entrepreneurs don't start companies because they read everything about economics. They start because they imagine a world where something could exist that didn't exist before. Leaders don't inspire people by reciting facts and figures. They inspire because they can paint a picture of the future so vividly that others begin to see it too. And notice how this operates on a psychological level. When you have no imagination, your focus narrows. You become consumed by the immediate, your failures, your obstacles, your limitations. Knowledge alone cannot pull you out of that. But when you engage imagination, you suddenly see beyond your current circumstances. Imagination stretches time. It allows you to suffer today because you can picture something meaningful tomorrow. That is why imagination is directly tied to resilience. It gives you a reason to endure because you're not only living in the present, you're living partly in the future that you're constructing in your mind. Purpose, then, is imagination with discipline. It's the marriage between vision and action. You imagine something better, and that image burns inside you so strongly that you begin to structure your life around it. You rearrange your habits, your relationships, your work, not because knowledge told you to, but because imagination revealed a direction you could no longer ignore. Knowledge can tell you how to take the next step, but imagination tells you which mountain is worth climbing. The tragedy is that many people never allow themselves to imagine deeply enough to discover their vision. They think purpose is something you find as if it's lying under a rock somewhere waiting. But purpose isn't found, it's created. It's crafted through the process of imagining what life could be, testing those images against reality, and then committing to the one that resonates with your soul. And here's the irony: when you commit to a vision born of imagination, your hunger for knowledge multiplies. Suddenly, facts matter, skills matter, expertise matters, but they matter because they are now serving something larger. Without vision, knowledge is directionless. With vision, knowledge becomes powerful. That's why purpose-driven people are relentless learners. They're not learning to pass the test. They're learning to build the future they've imagined. So when you think about imagination, don't reduce it to childlike fantasy. Understand it as the engine of vision and the birthplace of purpose. Knowledge may keep you afloat, but imagination tells you which shore to swim toward. And once you have that picture in your mind, it doesn't just give you clarity, it gives you energy, it gives you meaning, and it gives you the strength to keep moving when everything else tells you to quit. Because at the end of the day, knowledge might help you survive, but imagination will help you live. One of the fundamental differences between knowledge and imagination is this: knowledge provides answers, but imagination dares to ask questions. Answers are important, they give us stability. They anchor us in reality. But the danger with the answers is that they can create the illusion of completeness. When you have the answer, you stop looking, you stop searching, you stop exploring. Questions, on the other hand, keep the mind alive. They keep it curious and settled and open to new possibilities. And imagination is the birthplace of those questions. If you think about every great leap forward in human history, it began with questions. What if we could fly? What if disease could be cured? What if slavery could be abolished? What if human beings could explore the stars? These were not answers provided by knowledge, they were questions born out of imagination. Knowledge told us it was impossible, that the laws of nature or the structures of society could not be broken. But imagination refused to stop asking. And because someone asked, knowledge eventually had to evolve. That's a crucial point. Imagination forces knowledge to expand. It stretches the challenge, it pushes it beyond its current limits. Without imagination, knowledge stagnates. It becomes repetition rather than revelation. But when someone with courage asks, why not? Suddenly knowledge is forced to confront its own boundaries. That is how progress happens. This is just as true in your personal life. Knowledge will tell you who you are today. It will tell you your GPA, your bank account balance, your RA sum A, your failures and successes up to this point. Knowledge gives you the facts of your existence. But imagination is what asks, who could I be? What might I become if I refuse to stay here? Without that question, you remain confined to the answers you already have. With that question, you open the door to growth, transformation, and reinvention. Psychologically, this matters more than most people realize. A person who only lives by answers will eventually collapse under the weight of their limitations. Because answers don't inspire, they explain. They close the book rather than open it. But a person who lives by imagination, a person who constantly asks questions, can endure almost anything. Why? Because they are oriented toward possibility. Even in the darkest circumstances, they can ask, what might this mean? How can this be used? Where can I go from here? That active questioning creates resilience. It makes you stronger because your life is no longer confined to what is, it's directed toward what could be. Now, that doesn't mean knowledge is useless. In fact, it's essential, but it has to be placed in the right hierarchy. Knowledge is the servant, not the master. It answers the questions imagination dares to ask. If you invert that relationship, if you let knowledge dictate the boundaries of your life, you'll never break free from mediocrity. But if you let imagination lead, knowledge becomes a powerful tool for creation. So here's the challenge: don't become someone who only memorizes answers. Be the kind of person who dares to ask better questions. When everyone else says, this is how it's always been, let your imagination ask, but what if it could be different? When people settle for limitations, let your imagination ask, but what if I went further? Because questions ignite growth. Questions fuel discovery. Questions keep you alive. And the truth is, your life will be shaped not by the answers you know, but by the questions you're willing to ask. So dare to ask the question no one else is asking. Dare to imagine what no one else can see. Because the future doesn't belong to those who recite answers. It belongs to those who imagine the questions that haven't been answered yet. When life strikes hard, when you face setbacks, failures, or betrayals, knowledge alone often isn't enough to carry you through. Knowledge can tell you what happened, it can explain the mechanics of your loss, it can lay out the facts of your situation, but it rarely provides the strength to endure. What allows people to withstand suffering, to persevere through chaos, isn't just knowledge, it's imagination. It's the capacity to picture something beyond the immediate pain, to see a version of yourself that rises above it, to believe there's meaning or possibility on the other side. Think of anyone who has ever overcome extraordinary hardship. At some point, they had to imagine a different reality. A person battling addiction has to imagine themselves free before they ever take the steps to get clean. Someone buried in poverty has to imagine a future of abundance before they begin to climb out. An athlete recovering from devastating injury has to imagine the possibility of return before their body even begins to heal. That imaginative vision doesn't erase the suffering, but it gives it context. It transforms the pain into a process. Without that, hardship crushes you. With it, hardship becomes fuel. Creativity functions in much the same way. Creativity is not merely about artistic expression. It is the practical application of imagination in the face of obstacles. Creativity says, if the path is blocked, I will invent another one. If the solution doesn't exist, I will create it. And notice how resilience and creativity feed each other. Resilience allows you to stand back up, but creativity shows you a new way forward. Imagination sits at the core of both because it allows you to see more than what is in front of you. It allows you to see beyond limitation. There's a psychological principle here that's worth noting. People who lack imagination often see failure as final. They collapse because they cannot conceive of any alternative. Their narrative ends at the obstacle. But people who cultivate imagination don't see failure as an endpoint. They see it as raw material. They ask, how can this setback be used? What else might emerge from this loss? How might this pain shape me into something stronger? That act of reframing is an act of imagination, and it transforms suffering into growth. This is why resilience is not simply the ability to take punishment. It's the ability to transform punishment into purpose. That requires vision. It requires creativity. And at the root of both is the imagination to believe that your present circumstances are not your final reality. Knowledge can't give you that. Knowledge might tell you the statistics on survival rates or the probabilities of success, but imagination gives you the conviction to try anyway. It makes you defy the odds, not because you are guaranteed to win, but because you have envisioned a possibility worth fighting for. And let's be clear, this isn't just about optimism. Optimism can be shallow, it can deny reality. Imagination doesn't deny reality. It reinterprets it, it acknowledges the obstacle, but it refuses to be defined by it. That's why resilient people often appear almost unreasonable. They are, because their imagination makes them see what isn't yet visible to everyone else. And in time, their unreasonable vision becomes reality. So if you want to build resilience, if you want to unlock creativity, the first step is to train your imagination, feed it, challenge it. Push it beyond the predictable and the safe. Because when hardship inevitably arrives, and it will, your imagination will be the difference between collapse and transformation. At the end of the day, knowledge may describe your suffering, but imagination can redeem it. And that makes all the difference. If you look at the difference between those who follow and those who lead, it almost always comes down to imagination. Followers rely on knowledge. They rely on rules, instructions, and predetermined paths. They do what has been proven, what has already been laid out, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's safe, it's predictable, and it provides stability. But leaders step into uncharted territory. They don't just consume knowledge, they create new possibilities. They imagine a future that others can't yet see, and then they convince people to walk toward it. That's the essence of leadership, the ability to transform imagination into a shared vision. Think about it. The great leaders of history weren't merely the smartest people in the room. They weren't the ones with the most facts at their disposal. They were the ones who could reframe reality in such a way that people began to believe in something larger than themselves. Knowledge could tell them the odds, knowledge could list the risks, but imagination gave them a vision powerful enough to inspire loyalty, sacrifice, and courage. Without that imaginative spark, leadership reduces to management, maintaining what already exists rather than creating what could be. And this is why knowledge alone creates followers. Because knowledge, while useful, always points backward. It says, here's how it's been done. Followers take that information and replicate it. But leaders refuse to be bound by the past. They imagine new possibilities, and in doing so, they draw others into a future that doesn't yet exist. That act requires risk. It requires courage. It requires the willingness to step out before the path has been fully formed. And most people are too afraid to do that. They would rather cling to the certainty of knowledge than walk into the uncertainty of imagination. But uncertainty is the soil where leadership grows. When you dare to imagine what others cannot, you step into a space where there is no roadmap. That's intimidating, but it's also liberating. Because in that space, you're no longer constrained by the limits of what has been proven. You're free to create. And people follow those who create, not because they have all the answers, but because they embody the courage to ask new questions and walk into new territory. Psychologically, this is profound. People crave certainty, but they also crave meaning. Knowledge offers certainty, but imagination offers meaning. And meaning is ultimately stronger. A leader who can paint a vision of a future filled with meaning will inspire people far more deeply than someone who simply lists facts and strategies. This is why imagination is not just a skill. It's the essence of leadership. It transforms a person from a consumer of information into a creator of direction. And you can see this truth everywhere. The inventors who revolutionize industries, the activists who change societies, the visionaries who launch movements, they didn't wait for knowledge to confirm what was possible. They stepped out with imagination and let knowledge catch up later. They saw something invisible, spoke it into existence, and then rallied others to build it with them. That's leadership in its purest form. So the question becomes, are you content to repeat what has already been done, or will you dare to imagine something new? Because the world doesn't need more followers of knowledge, it needs leaders of imagination. It needs people who can see beyond the horizon, people willing to risk, to fail to create, and to inspire. At the end of the day, knowledge might make you competent, but imagination can make you a leader. And the world will always remember leaders, not followers. One of the most important truths we need to grasp is that the future is not built by those who merely know, it is built by those who imagine. Knowledge, as powerful as it is, always has an expiration date. What you know today may be irrelevant tomorrow. Entire industries vanish. Skills that once made people indispensable are now automated. Technology, culture, and society evolve at a pace that makes yesterday's expertise obsolete almost overnight. If you rely only on knowledge, you're already behind because knowledge represents the past. But imagination never expires. It is the only tool you have that can keep you ahead of the curve because it allows you to envision what does not yet exist and prepare yourself to meet it. Think about how the world has changed in just the last few decades. A generation ago, most of the jobs that dominate today's economy didn't even exist. No one was preparing to be a social media strategist or an app developer or a data scientist. Knowledge at that time couldn't predict these things. But imagination could. The people who asked, what if we could connect the entire world in an instant? What if we could carry all of human knowledge in our pocket? What if we could teach machines to learn like humans? Those were the ones who built the industries of today. They weren't simply applying what they knew, they were daring to imagine what they knew. This is why the future belongs to the imaginative, because the future is uncertain and knowledge alone cannot navigate uncertainty. Imagination, however, thrives, and imagination gives you flexibility. It allows you to adapt when the ground shifts beneath your feet. It allows you to see possibility where others only see disruption. And that ability to reframe uncertainty as opportunity is the essence of progress. On a psychological level, this is also what keeps people alive in times of change. If you tie your identity only to what you know, then every shift feels like a threat. You cling desperately to the past because it's the only thing that gives you stability. But if you cultivate imagination, you're no longer threatened by change. You're energized by it. You see it as a chance to create, to explore, to expand. That mindset doesn't just prepare you for the future. It positions you to shape it. This is why leaders, innovators, and visionaries so often appear prophetic. It's not that they knew everything in advance. It's that they allowed their imagination to guide them toward possibilities others couldn't yet perceive. And by the time knowledge caught up, they were already there. That's how entire industries are disrupted. That's how revolutions, technological, cultural, even spiritual, are born. And you can apply this to your own life. Your personal future will not be determined only by what you know today. It will be determined by how courageously you imagine tomorrow. If you can picture yourself growing, building, contributing, leading, if you can imagine it vividly enough, it will begin to shape the choices you make right now. And those choices will compound, turning imagination into reality. But if you can't see anything beyond what you already are, then you've already limited your future before it arrives. So the invitation is clear. Don't cling to knowledge as if it were enough. Knowledge is necessary, but it will always be incomplete. It can inform your journey, but it cannot define your destination. Only imagination can do that. Only imagination can show you futures worth pursuing. And the people who dare to imagine boldly, to act courageously, to create relentlessly, those are the ones who will own the future. So when we step back and look at it all, the message is simple but undeniable. Knowledge is valuable, but imagination is transformative. Knowledge can tell you where you are, but imagination shows you where you could go. Knowledge can maintain what already exists, but imagination creates what has never been seen before. It fuels vision, gives birth to purpose, asks the questions that drive progress, builds resilience in the face of adversity, and separates leaders from followers. And above all, it ensures that the future belongs to those bold enough to dream beyond the limits of today. The challenge, then, is not whether you can learn more facts. It's whether you have the courage to imagine more possibilities. Because the world doesn't remember those who only knew, it remembers those who dared to imagine, and then had the conviction to turn that imagination into reality. So ask yourself, will you live by the boundaries of knowledge, or will you step into the infinite horizon of imagination?